Welcome back to the Intelligent Builder podcast, sponsored by Plutus Agents. Today, I'm joined by Chris Welling, the owner of Trigon Builders, a boutique high-end custom home builder operating across South Florida with notable equestrian estate specialty. Chris and his team focus on one-off design-driven projects with tight owner oversight from pre-construction through finish. Chris, it's great to have you on.
Great to have me, Owen. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. So could you kind of give us the origin story? So how did Trigon come to be? What was the gap you were seeing in the South Florida market?
So basically, I had after college, I graduated from the University of Florida in building construction. So I'm sure there might be some people that click off after they hear I'm a Gator, but no. So graduated from UF. I worked for several different companies, from commercial builders to residential builders. My father was an architect for 50 years in Naples, Florida, doing high-end residential. So I kind of grew up in the residential side of the business. But then, I ended up moving to West Palm Beach. I partnered up with a builder that was in Wellington. We kind of partnered up and worked together for almost 10 years. And then through business, you kind of find out what you like, what you don't like. And so we parted ways, which was totally fine. And then I started Trigon Builders January 1 of 2018. Well, I think as I was in the area, I got to learn the area and what I wanted to do. And that's kind of why I wanted to break apart. There were certain things with having a partner that you might have to compromise. And I just didn't want to do that. So when we started Trigon Builders back in January 1 of 2018, I saw that there was a need for a boutique builder. I'm the owner of the company. We have several employees, but I'm on, my clients' jobs every week, doesn't fail. So I think it was just something that I wanted to create that, as I learned the business, learned South Florida, I always saw that, a builder would come in or an owner would come in, they would meet the owners of, whether it was an equestrian property, whether it was a high-end, residential estates on Palm Beach Island or even in Naples or Fort Myers. I just always would hear from clients saying that, they would meet the owner and then they would never see him again. And so that kind of resonated with me as I was learning the business after college and then wanting to start my own business. I really wanted to have that personal touch. And so, yeah, thanks for the introduction. I appreciate it. You said some of the things I was going to touch on, but at least it's why I started Trigon Builders and why I wanted to be more of that white glove, treatment, hand holding type of an owner where clients could always call me. My phone's on 24/7, which I'm sure my wife isn't happy about. But it's something that I really enjoy, and I like to have that access or have the clients feel they have the access to me.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, the personal touch, the building relationships with the clients is definitely super key, honestly, in the building process. It definitely establishes a trust and a comfortability with your customers too.
Yeah, and I think, for most people, purchasing a home or building a home, it's one of the largest, purchases in your whole life. I mean, some people, it is the largest purchase. I've been fortunate to have very wealthy clients, so it's not their biggest purchase they've ever had. They normally have, multiple homes, so they've dealt with builders, so they have an idea of what they want. And hopefully, as a company, we can take their vision and kind of make it a reality. So I think that's where we do that. I think it's a lot of hand holding. It is really a personal type purchase, or in the build process, it is personal. So I think that's where we really try to excel in. I think also, our communication is very, good. I think you have to have communication. I learned from a designer friend of mine. He said, communication is the key to success. And I think that's very, very true now because, some people, they hide behind the keyboard, or they're keyboard warriors, or they are or a problem comes up on a job and they tend to, hide behind a phone or whatever. I try to get out there and meet the client, explain what happened, and then walk them through the process. And obviously, I want to be known as somebody that has a solution to the problem. Yeah, there's going to be issues in construction. I think every builder, whether the best, they think they're the best builder, or even, guys that do production building. You're always going to have issues. It's just the nature of the beast. And that's probably, some of the reason I don't have any hair as well, is because, there's always issues. And I think as an owner, and I guess that's probably some advice that I would tell anybody, or any even young builder out there that's looking to get started. I would probably tell them, hey, if there is an issue, confront it. Don't sit behind a, phone. Don't ignore it. Get out in front of it. Try to find a solution, and then bring the solution to the team, whether it's a designer, architect, or meaning interior designer or architect or owner. I think even owners can appreciate it. I think designers or architects, they appreciate that, because not everything's going to fit perfectly together. And so I think it's our job as being in the field and actually building what they had envisioned. I think there's obviously always going to be little issues that we have to handle. And I think getting out in front of it and communicating that. And yeah, sometimes you have to eat things, and sometimes it's not foreseeable. We do new construction, but we also do remodels. And even in the remodel market, whether it's the equestrian side, somebody who bought an old barn or farm or estate and is now looking to renovate that, or if it's a home. So you're always having to deal with issues that are not foreseeable. So I think that's where we kind of excel in, in building in South Florida.
Yeah, definitely. You always gotta, over communicate. So there's a complete transparency the whole time, and approach every conversation with a problem-solving mindset, kind of like you were saying. But you describe your business as boutique, and I remember you were telling me in our last conversation it's like a one-off custom shop, So what does boutique really mean operationally?
Okay. Well, I mean, I consider boutique, basically, as we're a small company, we do 2 to 5 projects in Naples. So, I mean, in relatively speaking, in a lot of construction firms, they might take 10, 15, 20, that do the volume we do as far as like dollars and cents. But we do 2 to 5 projects, and that's residential. We don't do any equestrian projects in Naples or Fort Myers, or at least we haven't. So 2 to 5 on the Naples side. And then we tend to do, 2 to 10 in the West Palm Beach, Jupiter, south to kind of Fort Lauderdale area. We have been asked to go to, to Miami and other places. But kind of our core area is, yeah, Jupiter, south to Fort Lauderdale, out to Wellington, because that's kind of a pie shape. And then our Naples, Fort Myers areas, and boutique to us and to me really means that, I'm hands-on. I'm a hands-on builder. I'm going to be on your project, if not once a week, multiple times a week. I'm only one person, but we have project managers and superintendents that will be on the job day to day. But I tend to go to jobs like, for instance, when I go to Naples, I go there normally 1 day or 2 days a week. And then I have owner meetings. I meet with architects, or I'll meet with interior designers. I'll go to each job and I'll spend hours on each job, because, that's to help the superintendent. If there's any scheduling issues, any, supplier issues, I just want our clients to understand that I'm around, that I'm going to not micromanage our team, but I'm going to assist our team. So, I always tell our guys, we work together. I'm just because I'm might be the boss doesn't mean that, I'm not there for you to help, for you to call on me to help. And I don't mind, I mean, there's been times I've swept out houses, or get moved furniture for clients. We do what we have to, and sometimes, you have a team member that's sick or whatever. So you pick up some of that, some of those, whether it's a illness, or whether it's, hey, they're stuck on another job, or they're stuck with an inspector. We're always trying to help each other. And I think that's more like a boutique atmosphere, where sometimes when you get with the larger companies, which I have worked for larger companies coming out of college, I just didn't feel that you had that kind of family type camaraderie. It was more like, hey, this is your job, this is what you do, and you need to hit these goals type of deal. That's just a little bit different with our business, and there's not wrong or right with either one of them. It's just what I wanted to, how I wanted to run my business, and how I wanted that to be taken in by clients as well.
Yeah, that's great. That actually makes a lot of sense. I like the way you answered that. It laid it out pretty cleanly. So you talked about being kind of you're on both coasts over there. So what makes that expansion work? I mean, it's only about probably 3-ish hours coast to coast, but what changes in maybe operations or communication allow you to stretch from coast to coast?
Well, I have good people. So that's the first thing. I think any business owner is going to tell you, or any construction, owner is going to tell you, hey, you're as good as your subs and you're as good as your people that work for you. And, I've been fortunate to have some really good superintendents and project managers that I've worked with over the years. And so that's allowed me to, you know, um, empower the superintendent to run the job. If I had to be there every day, it just couldn't work. It wouldn't work. Naples for me is about from West Palm to Naples is about 2 hours. So give or take traffic. I mean, South Florida traffic can be a nightmare sometimes, but yes, you're right. It's under 3 hours to get coast to coast. And, the one good thing I think with me is that, I grew up in Naples. My father was an architect there. So I know a lot of this, subcontractor base. I know a lot of architects. I know a lot of realtors. So that really helped me transition to have a business in Naples and Fort Myers. Although I live in West Palm Beach, like I said earlier, I go over there once a week, maybe 1 to 2 days a week, depending on what we have going. Currently we have two projects in Naples. They're high end, one off custom homes. So, you know, I I can get away with going there one day a week. When we have 5 projects, okay, well, that's a little bit different. I can't spend the time with each superintendent, or sometimes a superintendent's taking care of 2 jobs, so, multiple jobs. So I might have to spend a little bit more time with them. I try to put another set of eyes on each one of these jobs because I do feel that, if you do load up the superintendent with 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, however many jobs, they start to get tunnel vision a little bit. It's not a fault. Like, it's not their fault. It's just the fact that, you can only have so much time on each job if you're splitting your time between 1, 2, 3 jobs. So you can miss things. I kind of, I'm really good at studying plans. I read a set of plans, and once we put an estimate together, the team puts an estimate together. I have kind of a photographic memory in that way. I mean, I couldn't tell you what I ate for dinner last night, but I have a good memory when it comes to plans. And I don't know if that was just something that I inherited through my father, but so when I walk a job, I remember it, you know, and when I walk through a set of plans, I remember it. So it does help to have a second set of eyes or third set of eyes. And that's why, we always welcome the architect to walk the job, the designer to walk the job, the owner. And if you see something, raise your hand. I mean, we're all human here. We're trying to make everyone happy. We know this is, like I said, this is one of the biggest purchases maybe, our client might make or have. So we want them to be satisfied in the end. And sometimes there's things that we miss, and that we would like to correct. And if somebody, a part of the team sees something, we definitely want them to let us know so that we don't get too far down the road before then it's more of an issue to fix. So no, we welcome, architects and designers to constantly walk our jobs because, it makes our job easier, I think, in the end. And for the superintendent, having a second, third set of eyes really helps them.
Yeah, that photographic memory superpower is definitely pretty helpful when you're on job sites. So it's cool you're able to stretch yourself coast to coast and still have that good communication and high touch as an owner. But I'm very curious about the equestrian estates that you build because you said you're in the West Palm Beach area. So that and Wellington is kind of where it's super popular, right? So
Yes, sir.
what makes those builds so unique? And also, maybe what's a lesson you learned the hard way building one of those?
Oh, well, I've made my fair share of mistakes for sure. I started building in Wellington probably 2010. I would say roughly 2010. Might have been a little bit earlier than that, but for this conversation, it's totally fine. It doesn't matter. So when I came out to Wellington, I knew nothing about horses. Okay, like how to build an estate, how to plan. Where should we put paddocks? How should a barn lay out? Where should the tack room? Where should the feed room? Where should accessibility of where you would, where you would rinse the horse off. What is a horsehair interceptor? Like there's just all these things that I had nothing to do with because growing up it was always residential building or commercial building. So when I got out to Wellington, I had a partner then and that helped because he had built a few farms. I probably over the course of the last 15, or so years probably have built 20 different estates out in Wellington. I currently have a farm that we're building and finishing up right now. Some of the things that I've learned was just, uh, where we want to lay out. Like a lot of times 15, 20 years ago, there was a lot of property in Wellington. So I was having to almost plan out a 5-acre estate, a 2-acre estate, a 10-acre estate. So we were laying out where the home would go, where the barn would be in on the property and the relationship to the paddocks, the arena, which would be, a riding arena, whether that was jump for jumpers, whether it was dressage, whether it was for hunters or, and then we did a couple polo facilities. Yeah, Wellington's one of the horse capitals of the world during, the winter months from December to April-ish. So, and there's a lot of unique challenges too. Like I never realized like in Wellington, there's muck. So, the soil in Wellington was like basically sod farms and all kinds of different agricultural, land. And so when Wellington really started expanding and exploding in the horse market, we had to deal with, 5-acre parcels where we would have to scrape a foot, 2 foot from the whole site and then fill it up 3, 4, 5 feet. I mean, so it would just be months of trucks loading in trucks and dozers and taking out muck pockets and depending on where we were putting, the home or the barn, or we were putting in access roads, or we putting, there's just so much to it that, it was definitely a crash course in equestrian building those first few years. And so some of the mistakes I made, making, when we would build, farms and barns in particular, we would put like knee walls and, not really sharp corners, but we would always try to trim stuff out with wood and make it look beautiful. I mean, some of the farms we did are nicer than people's homes, that you would go into. So, with tongue and groove ceilings, with beautiful, custom made stalls, stainless, sometimes steel, but whatever. And so we did, there was a few things where we did some knee walls and did metal trim and wood trim and all this stuff. And then we found out, shortly that some trainers would come in and be like, oh, that's a hazard for a horse, if they whip their head back and they could poke their eye, it could, it really hurt them. So I learned some of those lessons. I learned about, where to put a tack room, don't put it all the way at the end of the barn, where you have to walk, the whole length of the barn to get to it, so try to put that centrally located, some of the wash stalls, do we want to put them inside? Do we want to put them outside? Where is the horsehair interceptor? Where is the well compared to, where you have your septic? And, because Wellington, there are some areas where you have city water and all that, but then there are some equestrian farms that you would have, septic and wells and everything else. So, and there's regulations to that where you could have a horsehair interceptor, which is basically a big strainer, if you will, of for hair before it would go into the drain field. So it's basically like a big septic tank that you would put outside of a wash stall that would be all connected through the drainage system of the wash stalls. And then you would be able to clean that out occasionally, just like a septic tank, right? So there was all these little nuances and obviously, learning the engineering behind it. So yes, did I make mistakes? Of course, definitely learned from them. But I also think that you, as I built more farms, I got to be able to consult architects. I got to be able to work with architects that have done farms in Kentucky or North Carolina or New York or whatever, wherever, California. And so I got to learn from a bunch of different architects and and collaborate with them. So I think that's where some of those mistakes and that learning curve kind of quickly, you know, evaporated, to where I wasn't making any of those mistakes, or at least, could see them before they would happen.
Yeah, that sounds extremely complicated. I couldn't even imagine just having to make sure all that's going right. So you must have great processes and operational vision. So maybe could you walk us through like the simple operating system, but from a more simple standpoint, say from like
Yeah.
inquiry to pre-con to permitting to build to close out.
Yep, no problem. So traditionally how I work is I normally am referred. I do a little bit of advertising, through high-end magazines and stuff, but most of my work is in business is through word of mouth. Traditionally how I get my clients, just to give you a kind of a process of how it would traditionally go with my business, is that I normally am referred by an architect, an owner, an interior designer, or a realtor, or it's somebody I know, right? It's always repeat business, or it's somebody I meet, at a horse show, or in particular for the equestrian side. For the residential side, it's either one of those four. So either architect, interior designer, realtor, or, a referral from a past owner. So that's pretty much how I get my business. Traditionally, what we do is, if they have a set of plans, great. Then, we'll talk about that. We'll give them a preliminary estimate, from just historical data, whether it's Palm Beach Island, whether it's West Palm, Wellington, Naples, Fort Myers. So we'll kind of, from our historical data that we've built other homes, and through talking with the client and finding out, hey, what do you like? Maybe we ask them for Pinterest, or, some type of inspirational, pictures. So then we can really give them more of a, a preliminary estimate that is more accurate, because anyone can say, oh yeah, I can build it for 500 a foot, or I can build it for 700 a foot, or 1,000 or 1,200, or whatever it might be. I mean, you can tell them it's 2,000 a foot for all, and there are projects that we've done that are, that are range from what I just said. That's first what we do. So we talk to them about who our company is, who I am as a business owner. And then we talk to them about, first, let's put a preliminary estimate together to give you an idea of where we think the project's going to land. And that's going to fluctuate, right? Because, sometimes we will give them allowance for $20 a foot for flooring. Well, they end up spending that on material, not even the install portion. So, then we'll have to make those corrections, which are not a big deal, but at least somebody has a placeholder. And that's what I tell people. Like, when we give them an estimate, whether it's a remodel or new construction, we just want to make sure we give you a somewhat of an accurate budget, whether, the flooring is going to be 50,000, 100,000, and it ends up being 120. Well, at least we're not way off base, but they normally will see whether that's going to be, because of a decision they made, or because the designer picked something, or whatever. I mean, I tell owners, we're basically order takers, we're order takers, and then we execute the plan, right? Your designer and architect, they're going to, draw what needs to be drawn. And then we're going to take that vision and we're going to build it and we're going to execute it. But, I'm not picking materials. So owners and designers are picking materials. So like I said, in that instance I gave you just for flooring, we might put an allowance for $20 a foot. They might pick something more, less, whatever. And then we just adjust it. So our preliminary budgets normally turn into what we would do for a contract. So then that would be attached to our contract, and that would kind of be our, our baseline of what we're going to build off of, whether it's up and down. Because as homeowner, I think you want to know about where you're at, whether that fluctuates a little bit up, a little bit down, but at least it should kind of equal out in the end, because we're giving you a historical number for that house that you're building. Even though it's a one-off custom, we're still going to know about what it's going to be. Like, if somebody comes and brings me a contemporary house, I know it might be, say start at, 600-700 a foot, and, or somebody doing a more traditional with more millwork, and, might be a little bit more because there's more paneling, there's more, just beams and other things that might, push that number up, right? So we'll traditionally give them a contract. We'll talk to them about, we use Buildertrend. I'm sure a lot of people that are listening probably would understand there's obviously a ton of different programs out there. We use Buildertrend because we think that it's a good program. It's a simple program. My daughter can get on it for that matter, and look at daily reports, look at the budgets. You can't manipulate anything, but at least as an owner, you can log in from anywhere in the world on an app, on your Apple, your Android, whatever, and you have a password and username and password, and you go in there and you can see everything that's going on. So our superintendents or project managers will do daily reports on those, so they'll see progress, who's on the job, the weather, and they'll also see, pictures of what happened that day or multiple days. So, so basically moving from that, then we work with the team, whether it's, the architect, the designer, homeowner, whoever it might be, to, picking out materials, whether, and finishes, whether that's going to meetings with them, to look at windows, to look at roofing, to look at flooring, cabinetry, countertops, the main items, the nuts and bolts of the job is in the plans. So obviously we're building off the plans. If we need to change something, then we do that as a team, and then everybody, will be contacted, subs, and, obviously the super while building. We'll get all that information. And then the process really is for us, from start to finish, they get an owner that's on the job, consistently. They have a superintendent that is on the job day to day, a project manager that might be part-time, depending on the project or size. Some of our projects, we have, even an assistant superintendent, and then a project manager if it's a big custom home. So it just kind of depends. And then obviously we have our accounting staff who will bill the job every month. We bill on the first of the month and then normally get paid 7 to 10 days later. And we just do that every month, and then kind of towards the end of the process, we go through obviously the punch stage, a punch out stage as we're closing a job. And then we give them, a sub list and then all their warranty items. We help them with registering, kind of a standard for us is Sub-Zero Wolf and appliances. So we'll give them all of the warranty stuff. We'll give them all the specifications and booklets so that they have that all in a 3-ring binder. And then we give them a warranty as well. And then, most of our clients, we tend to help them after they get their furniture in. We help them for the first year. If something comes up, we're normally, if somebody dings a wall or whatever, we're always doing something. So that's pretty much the process of what we use and the program we use in Buildertrend. And we've found it very simple, very easy to work with. Most of our clients have never had a problem, with the site because it's just so even if you're like an Apple person, it's just really easy with the app. You click in, you sign in, and then it's basically drop down tabs. It's so easy. Anyone can do it. And like I said, my 7-year-old, can get on there and navigate through. But it's a really nice program. So if any builder is listening, they might want to take a look at it. It's a fairly inexpensive program just for, when anyone that might be listening. And we've had really good luck with it. It keeps your historical data, which is nice. And you can use it for the accounting side. So we use it a little bit for accounting, but mostly for the project management and construction side, because we just feel like our superintendents have so much stuff to do during a project. Let's make it as easy as possible.
Yeah, definitely. Keeping things simple and as easy as possible is so key, especially in construction too. So it seems like you have a pretty solid process and good communications. But let's go kind of bigger picture. So what are the goals you have going into 2026? What would make the next 12 months kind of a win for you?
So, obviously I'm always looking for work. That's like, I think as an owner or a construction company, even though we've had such great times, my business is a little bit different. I don't just, get, 15, 20 jobs or try to go out and get a bunch of remodel work. Like I tend to be a little bit more selective in who I build for, what I build. I've had people ask me to build the same whole house over and over again, and I just won't do it. I don't want to do it. And I think most architects that I talk to, they want to do something interesting. That's why I think I do love my job. But to get back to your question, the next, 12 months, 24 months for me, because most of my projects last 12 months, 16, 18 months, whatever, 2 years in some of the big equestrian estates. Um, if I was getting 2 to 5 projects, over the next 12 months, because we already have a backlog of work, I think that would be good. I think the economy is always something that every builder is probably looking at. Interest rates, we're all looking at, even for my high end clients. I mean, most of my clients are getting their loans from their, their brokerages, you know, they're paying way less than we would do if you got a conventional construction loan. So for a lot of my clients, I don't think interest rates really matter. But I think for some people, it does matter because I do build homes that are 3, 4, $5 million. And so those people, yeah, some of those might be, from savings, or they sold the house and they're 1031ing the money into another project or whatever. But, interest rates, if they could fall another half a point, whatever, over the next few months, I think you're going to start seeing more people release the purse strings a little bit. So we're always looking at that. I'm always talking to other builders. I got a ton of great friends that are builders that we, play golf together. We kind of talk about the market. We talk about like challenges with like subcontractors or suppliers. I mean, during COVID, that was the biggest issue, was like, when can you get a Sub-Zero refrigerator? And I love Sub-Zero, but during that time it was difficult, and we've gotten out of that because, COVID's been a few years. Some of the costs have stayed up. I think with, some of the wages that have happened, that's kept some of the building costs up. Obviously, petroleum's coming down, which is good. So I think some products should come down, but they just haven't yet. So, I mean, we're always talking. I'm always talking to, different developers as well. So I think that's kind of big picture what we're all talking about. Wish construction costs would come down, but I think they're kind of here to stay for a while, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah. You begin to touch on the industry and headwinds a little bit, which that is the last question I want to go a little bit deeper into. But before I ask that last question, I like to ask this question to all the guests. So let's say hypothetically, right, you have a magic wand and you can erase or fix one thing in the business right now that could be holding you back or slowing you down. What would that one thing be? Or maybe an iteration you're looking into?
So I think the one thing for me would be finding another me, I think finding people that are self-motivated, that treat the business like their own. That's what I did when I came out of college. Like, I just had that mentality. And even when I partnered up, with someone, I always had that mentality that I'm going to outwork you. And there's nothing like work ethic, so if I could find another, guy or woman, whatever, that I could find that wanted to take some of the reins and the bulls by the horns, that would be something that if I had a magic wand, I would wish for and get. But I also think it's also getting more good people. I mean, my business, could I expand my business and grow from 2 to 5 projects in Naples to 5 to 10? Yes. But finding those people, and I'm not the type of person that is going to poach other people. I just don't believe in it. I think growth happens kind of organically, and I'm just not the type of person. I would prefer to stay small and nimble and the way we are than grow and steal people from other contractors. Like, I hear that in the business. I hear it from other builders, and there's not one builder that could say that about me. Like, I just don't do that. I don't believe in it. No amount of money is going to matter to me in that. So if I could find better people and good people, I have great people, but I'm saying if I could find more, that's what you're asking me. That's what I would do. That's what I would wish. I mean, the work, I can get the work. I've never had a problem getting work. And I've always told my wife this. I said, hey, you know what? Whenever she said, oh, the economy's this or that, or, I slowed down in business, I always told her, you know what, honey, I can always make more money. Like, I've always had that confidence in myself and understanding that if you can go out there and you outwork people, you're going to get work. And if you are honest and you communicate well, you're going to find work. And so I think it's not about getting work. I can get that. So it's really about the people that I surround myself. And I think the other aspect of that question that I would touch on is subs. We are only as good as our subs. There's been change in some of my subs. Some of my subs I've known for 20 years, and now they're selling to, PE firms, or they're selling to employees that have gone up through the business that I've known, and now they're taking over their business. And with that, there's growth issues. There's, quality control issues. Those are the things that I think every builder, and even us as builders, like, we talk about, like when a company's gone out of business, or, hey, I just asked a buddy of mine, hey, do you have a good stair guy? Or do you have a good this, whatever it might be. Um, and so we do share in subs. And I think so. For most builders, I think they would say that is that our subs are key to our success, our people. And then, obviously having good clients. I've been fortunate to have really good clients. Occasionally you're going to get the bad apple or whatever, bad seed, whatever you want to say it. But I've been pretty fortunate. So, those are the things that if I had a magic wand, I probably would ask for or try to create.
Yeah, for sure. Good people. I don't want to say they're hard to find now, but they kind of are. Especially if you want to find someone that's got the same work ethic as you. That's something I struggle with. I've been trying to find somebody too, but like, not that I hold myself to a higher point, but it's
Yeah,
hard
no,
to
I
find people
get
with
you.
good work ethic, you know?
No, and I think that's even, something I try to instill in my kids. I have a son who's in college, and I have a daughter who's in, elementary school. But I think that's the thing. I think, with the internet and with the phone and with this, I think, people have gotten a little bit more relaxed and our business, is a hands-on business. You can't run it from your phone. You have to be in front of people. You have to talk to people. Yes, we do a lot of stuff with our phones, and the phone has been a great invention for that. It's allowed me to have a business in Naples and a business in West Palm. If I didn't have a phone or couldn't do some of the things I do, that would be very difficult. But I think, this whole age of, even with COVID, where people wanted to work from home, and that's great in theory, but that's not what we do in this business. You have to be out. You have to be willing to get your hands dirty. You have to be willing to sweep. You have to be willing to do whatever it takes sometimes to make it happen. And yeah, work ethic is great, but is also, having a little bit of common sense and a brain helps. I think there was this huge boom before COVID, and all these big builders were putting people in positions that really they weren't qualified for. And so now those people think that they're builders or whatever. That's just not how it is. I think that there's a lot of things that, that we could get back to the basics and use technology as it's meant to be used. But, the basics are being on the job, being present, answering the subs questions, watching the job, and really, making sure that mistakes are limited. That's, quality control as well. But that's the key to this business. This business is being present and knowing what to do and trying to foresee any issues. If you're doing that, you're like 80% above the rest of the builders out there. I mean, that's just the bottom line, and like what I see and who I talk to. And there's some great builders we have in Palm Beach. There's some great builders in Naples, Fort Myers. And, I think most of them say, obviously, they say, hey, it's being present and watching everything, because it does matter.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. You've dropped some great insights, honestly, for all kinds of builders out there. So I think that's honestly a great way to wrap it up. So thank you, Chris. I appreciate your time. But
Thanks,
before we
Al.
close out, though, where should people connect with you? Maybe website, LinkedIn?
No problem. Yeah. So I appreciate the interview. It was great. It was fun to talk a little bit about where we've been, where we are, where we're going, type of deal. But yeah, anybody can reach out to me. So it's Chris or Welling at Trigon Builders. But my email is Chris at Trigon Builders with an S, FL.com. They can look us up on Instagram. They can look us up on Facebook. And my phone is always on. So you can call me at 239-777-2767. Try to not call me too late Eastern time or whatever. But yes, I have people that text me all the time. I have clients in Europe. I have clients on the West Coast. And so, I just like to be accessible. So yeah, if anybody has any questions or needs anything or wants our services, you can always go to www.trigonbuildersfl.com. That's our website. So happy to, touch base with anybody, or if you have any questions in the future, man, feel free to call me or email me. All right.
Awesome, Chris. I appreciate that. I'll link some of the information below so it's easier to get to. But to the
Yeah.
audience, thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to share with another builder or founder in your circle and subscribe to see the next episode of The Intelligent Builder.